my babies, and we're back. All right, chapter 5.2. So remember, what we're doing right now is managing the life cycle of the requirements. The first thing we did was basically identified it. We talked about it for a bit. Second thing we did is talk about tracing the requirements and basically how everything is a documentation. Everything, single one of these stages is a documentation. So maintain requirements. What's the purpose of it? The purpose of maintain requirements is to retain requirement accuracy and consistency throughout and beyond the change during the entire requirements lifecycle, and to support reuse of requirements and other solutions. Basically, that's when you kind of like revisit all the requirements and everything basically that you're kind of like through the tracing that you do earlier, you get to revisit certain things because you kind of like through tracing you're creating the connections with each other and you're kind of like following through on how they connect. So when that follow through, maybe there comes like a bit more detail, which is kind of like maintaining the requirement. Is it still justifiable? Does it make sense? Why did we have it to begin with? Are we contributing to it and all that good stuff? Description. A requirement that represents an ongoing need must be maintained to ensure that it remains valid over time, which means we always have to consider it because ultimately everything we do is supporting some form of change, or at the very least kind of like coming close to something that's actually like it's messing with the requirement itself, because if we're adding value to it we have to maintain it. If we're going away from it we have to basically either adjust it or maintain our actions in relevance to the actual requirement. So in order to maximize the benefits of maintaining and reusing requirements, the requirements should be consistently represented, as in we look for them every single time we're actually doing something. Reviewed and approved for maintenance using standardized process that defines proper access rights and ensures quality. Not anyone could actually like revise the requirements. Normally, it's people that are like put in charge, maybe higher ups, maybe somebody that's specific if it's a financial requirement, like these kinds of things. And easily accessible and understandable so that the people that are actually like engaging with it, if you change it or you maintain it a certain kind of way, again, like they were still very abstract about the maintaining part, so we'll get to it, I'm sure, because here we will either figure it out as we read more or they explain it to us better. But ultimately, like anytime you're doing something, you have to always be considering other people as well. Easily accessible and understandable. Yay. And what are the inputs? We get a diagram. Requirements. The inputs are the requirements, basically. Includes goals, objectives, business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, transition requirements. These should be maintained throughout their life cycle. So, okay, so now the requirements are kind of like a bit broadified because there are goals, objectives, business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, transition requirements, and I'm sure we can always figure something more because what I'm thinking about it, when the minute I saw transition, the first thing I thought of was basically like requirements for the transition might be also like the people, the tools that we need, the structure that we want to actually work with. We might actually look at policies, like everything that feeds into that requirement, or at the very least, the transition being a smooth one, right? Like I got like the friction aspect of it. But as well, the solution requirements, like you know, how do we get to the solution? Are we getting to it? Is it still as heavy on a workload when it comes to the things that we need? That's where maintenance comes in because you're always kind of like going back and like adjusting something, fixing something, editing something. Like this is done. Why would we still use it to focus? If we finish something, we want to remove it so that makes more sense right now. Because maintaining requirements kind of always goes like, we're done with this, so other people need to know that we're done with this, so they're not actually working towards it as well. And that's efficiency and effectivity. Designs can be maintained throughout their life cycle as needed as well. So naturally, with everything, we need an input of a requirement and a design. A design is basically is design the visible aspect of a requirement, or basically how a requirement is reached or how it fits in when it comes to the overall plan? Still don't know, but ultimately, because it's design, that means it's kind of like storylined, structurally told. Maintain requirements input output diagram. So there's input and output, which are the requirements of the and designs. These requirements and designs are from 5.1, the trace requirements. The tools are basically information management approach from chapter 3, and the one that we created in chapter 3. And the output is requirements maintained, designs maintained. You get it. So like this seems to be an iterative process as well. Like every single time we do something, what we do is we go back to the requirements life cycle, all of it, and we go through trace requirements, and then we maintain the requirements, and then we prioritize the new ones, and we check on which ones require prioritization, and then we assess them, assess the requirement changes, and then approve the requirements. So basically, it seems like every chapter, a full chapter, has like sub chapters that you kind of go through in order to like get out of the chapter fully. And every chapter is calling like for some form of document that needs to be completed every single move we make. Ooh, look at that. What are the elements? Well, maintaining requirements and maintain attributes, reusing requirements. Well, maintain requirements, you maintain them, and you kind of like, what are the attributes? We'll get to it. Requirements are maintained so that they may remain correct and current after the approved change. You see, I said that literally a page ago. Business analysts are responsible for conducting maintenance to ensure this level of accuracy is retained. For requirements to be properly maintained, they must be clearly named and defined and easily available to stakeholders. Business analysts also maintain the relationship among requirements, sets of requirements, and associated business analysis information to ensure the context and original intent of the requirement is preserved. Repositories with accepted taxonomies assist, and here they're kind of like basically I remember in the previous chapter about, or in the previous video, I taught like relationships thing kind of like came to me. I don't know if it was a deeper insight from my perspective or something that I felt like required a bit more energy. But uh, when we're considering a relationship, especially when it comes to the requirements, because they're all connected together, right? Any change we do is going to impact that connection, that relationship within them. And we are the dynamic that connects them. We are basically the flow. We are the fuel. We're not the fuel for the engine, but we're basically the oil for the we're the oil for the engine that basically allows everything to kind of like move. And we have to check for everything that's connected to it, whether it is the information, we have to ensure the context and the original intent of the requirement is preserved. Repositories with accepted taxonomies assist in establishing and maintaining links between maintained requirements. Like taxonomies, what is taxonomies here? Let's Google it. Taxonomies meaning. All right, so taxonomy is the science of classification according to predetermined system. So with the resulting catalog used to provide a conceptual framework for discussion, analysis, or information retrieval. So let's look at the example. All right, let's look at an example in a way where you can see it as well. Sorry, internet sucks in Lebanon. We are being attacked by Israel. And here we go. So here's an example. Domains, kingdoms, phylum, phyla, classes, orders. Taxonomy commonly used in biology. So it seems to be, taxonomy seems to be basically how you separate things. I don't know if it's in concern or basically just kind of like give them certain spaces and show the connection they have with them or the layering of them or whatever it is. So ultimately, like because we are documenting and we are designing diagrams and like different kinds of like visualizations for the plan and the movement of the actual like of the project that we're doing. So I'm sure this what they meant by taxonomies here is basically how we actually express it and communicate it to others. It's not everyone wants to read a 500-page book, man. Some people are just good enough with the chart and they're good to go. And facilitate the requirements, designs, traceability. Amazing. So basically everything we do, requirements through maintaining the actual requirements, we make sure they're correct and we make sure they're approved. Well, later we make sure that the change is approved after an approved change, okay? And we're responsible for conducting maintenance to ensure the level of accuracy is retained, and they gave us examples. Maintain attributes while eliciting requirements. Business analysts elicit requirement attributes, information such as requirement source, priority. These are, well, with every requirement, we kind of have that kind of like outline of where we actually are getting the information for it. And here it's basically when maintaining attributes are basically like we're documenting the source, the priority, complexity, aid, and managing each requirement throughout the life cycle. Some attributes might change as the business analyst uncovers more information or even like as and conducts further analysis. So I would imagine like an attribute like priority, when you're actually finished with it, you remove priority from the list. So it seems like what we're doing with this is also like the way we maintain is applied to the system that we're approaching things with. Because remember, this system is read by other analysts and eventually stakeholders. Some attributes change as the business analyst uncovers more information and conducts further analysis. An attribute may change even though the requirement does not. Uh, what's the case for that? If an attribute changes simply because the requirement's still the same, but the attribute, let's consider the attribute as the perspective maybe, or it could be a perspective because here it's source, priority, and complexity. So maybe the requirement's still there, but the source changed, right? That could be an attribute that has to change because now like we're looking at it from I don't know, if you're looking at a factory, you can look at a requirement from the management side, but then you realize the requirement itself is necessary, but we need the information from the client side or from the technician side or the warehouse side or something like this. So reusing requirements, there are situations in which requirements can be reused, which is awesome because like once you finish with it, you can actually reapply whatever you did as a requirement in another space. Requirements that are candidates for long-term use by the organization are identified, clearly named, defined, and stored in a manner that makes them easily retrievable by other stakeholders. Remember, everything that we do is actually going to lead to something else. So here they're just telling us of how we actually handle a requirement when it's done. Depending on the level of abstraction and intended need being addressed, requirements can be reused within the current initiative, within similar initiative, within similar departments. So if we do a project that had some requirements, and after a while we're doing another project, we can reuse the same things that we like. We don't have to go through the same requirements and rebuild it from scratch. We already finished it within similar departments and throughout the entire organization. Requirements at high levels of abstraction may be written and with limited reference to specific solutions. Requirements that are presented in general manner without direct ties to a particular tool or organization structure tend to be more reusable. These requirements are also less subject to revision during a change, right? Because ultimately, like we sealed the deal. Okay, so maybe no, it's not because we sealed the deal, because like if this requirement is kind of like independent of all other stuff, right? So they are more reusable simply because, oh, it's amazing. Because the first thing I thought about right now is functions. And there's a thing we call in programming a pure function. And that pure function is literally as long as you give it the same input, it will always give out the same output. Nothing changes with it. And it's literally like if you're x plus 10 equal y. If x is 1, you're going to get y equal 11. And as long as you put x equal to 1, you're always going to get y. But sometimes, especially when it comes to programming, we get random data from different places in order to basically like adjust it and give out an output. So a non-pure function is a function that if you give data, the same data, similar data might change the output because it's receiving different data. So it's not, the math in it is not pure, or the calculations are not pure, or the outcome is not like specific, is reliant on other stuff. So in such a case here, I'm seeing it as more of a pure requirement. A pure requirement is a requirement that kind of like is not really connected to other things, which means it stands on its own and it could be easily reusable simply because we don't have to go and like check if the things that it's counting on or relying on is actually or have changed or something. Right? These requirements are also less subject to revision during a change. As requirements are expressed in more detail, they become more tightly associated with a specific solution or solution option. So the more detailed we dive into the requirements, the more they start kind of like presenting us a direction towards the solution we're trying to find. That's here, specific solution or solution option. Specific references to applications or departments limit the reuse of requirements and designs across organizations. Requirements for software engineering are completely different than requirements for warehouse management, right? Requirements that are intended for reuse reflect the current state of the organization. Stakeholders validate the proposed requirements for reuse before they can be accepted into change. So it's funny, in a way, what we could do is we could actually look at one, because we're always, as business analysts, looking at the bigger picture and we're going down. But as we're diving deeper into like the minute details that we need in order to come up with a solution, what we could do is we can handle it in a way where I don't know if it's dissect the word that I want to use, but ultimately, like the building blocks of a building are literally blocks, right? These blocks are, they're not created, they're the same. And if anything, like a big part of like Chinese construction is what they do is they create an apartment and they kind of connect it to the rest of the floor, and instead of like building the apartment through blocks, they kind of prefab it or pre-manufacture it and bring the whole apartment. And so it's basically block, 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 block. The whole building is done and ready to live in at one point. With this kind of approach, what we do exactly is we kind of look at the requirements, and it's our job to kind of separate the concerns so that if we are to reuse the requirements, we have the basis at the very least. Or if we want to reuse anything from our work, we always have the base of where we're getting the information or where the requirements are. And if we're able to separate them, but their combination comes up with the solution, then we will have done a much better job simply because we created the building blocks for any solution to come, right? Requirements are intended for reuse, reflect the current state of the organization. Stakeholders validate the proposed requirements for reuse before they can accept into a change. Every single requirement before we use it or before we change anything on it or something like this requires some form of validation, whether it's because of time, whether because of the changes in the market, whether it's because changes in management. We don't fucking know. But ultimately, that's basically, you always need Uncle Sam to say, yes, I approve. Anyways, stakeholders. Guidelines and tools, information management approach. It indicates how requirements will be managed for reuse. Amazing. Techniques, business rules analysis, used to identify business rules that may be similar across the enterprise in order to facilitate reuse. Data flow diagrams, used to identify information flow that may be similar across the enterprise in order to facilitate reuse. Data modeling, used to identify data structure that may be similar across the enterprise in order to facilitate reuse. Document analysis, used to analyze exciting documentation about an enterprise that can serve as the basis for maintaining the reusing documents. Amazing, man. Functional decomposition, functional, they use the word function, which means whatever I said earlier, man, makes more sense now. Functional decomposition, decomposition is the word they use. What was the word? Dissecting, I was actually working. Decomposition is work. Used to identify requirements associated with the components and available for reuse. Look at that. I thought about it before we came to it. Fuck yeah. Process modeling, used to identify requirements associated with the process that may be available for reuse. It's funny because like they're really considering like that requirement, where it fits, how it fits, when it fits. Use cases and scenarios, used to identify a solution component that may be utilized by more than one solution. And use stories, use cases probably through research and shit like this. And user stories, used to identify requirements associated with a story that may be available for reuse. I've been working on user stories a lot in my design approach to my platform. And if anything, yeah, because like user stories are basically are contributors to the solution that I have to make, which is the platform. So basically their requirements fit into the solution that I have. Yes. Stakeholders, domain subject matter expert, because it references maintained requirements on a regular basis to ensure they are accurately reflected stated needs. Implementation subject matter expert utilizes maintained requirements when developing regression tests for conducting impact analysis for enhancement. Operational support maintains requirements that are likely to be referenced on or to confirm the current state. A regulator maintained requirements are likely to be referenced to confirm compliance to standards. And a tester maintained requirements are used by testers to aid the test plan and test case creation. And finally, outputs. What are the outputs? Maintained requirements, defined once and available for long-term usage by the organization. They may become organizational process assets or be used in future initiatives. In some cases, a requirement that was not approved or implemented may be maintained for a possible future initiative. They right now they kind of like so like if the requirement is not approved or implemented, doesn't necessarily mean it's useless. It could probably just mean they don't want to use it on whatever it is that we're doing right now. Whatever. Designs, maintained designs, may be reusable once defined, for example, as a self-contained component that can be made available for potential future use. This is what I'm talking about. Self-contained component, what basically is a pure function. Like this is basically a piece that can fit in certain places and you use it in different places. And that's it. We're at 5.3. How was this? A little quickie. Bye.